Order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. This hearing is entitled Decades of Dysfunction, Restoring Accountability at HUD. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in the record. I now recognize myself for 4 minutes to give an opening statement. Today's hearing is entitled, again, Decades of Dysfunction, Restoring Accountability at HUD. I would like to thank the Acting Inspector General for being here today to discuss persistent waste, fraud, and mismanagement at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. For decades, HUD's IG has investigated, uncovered, and highlighted severe deficiencies plaguing the agency. HUD's core mission is to provide safe and affordable housing, something very, very important, and it's something we all support on this subcommittee. However, HUD continues to very often waste taxpayer funds while failing to meet its most basic responsibilities and has little to no mechanisms to track and report these issues. This is a fact. Year after year, HUD's appropriations are squandered, mismanaged, or lost through fraud and improper payments. In 2017, $1.7 billion was lost through improper payments, and there's no evidence to suggest anything has been corrected or improved. Accountability is in short supply, and a lack of transparency has eroded public trust. Yet, HUD spending increased from $45.4 billion to $78.4 billion from 2021 to 2024. Unfortunately, HUD's failures extend beyond the risks of fraud and its inability to track and report improper payments. The agency relies on outdated IT systems, some designed and built in the 1970s, and in turn lacks the data collection processes required for effective oversight. When I served in Pennsylvania as the Revenue Secretary, we modernized our IT systems, and the improvements in tax revenue were so significant, people actually asked what we were doing differently. How were things improving so much? It wasn't magic, it was better data, better oversight, and better decision-making. While HUD faces many challenges, its minimal oversight of programs and grantees also raises serious concerns. Requiring grantees to have a fraud prevention plan as part of the grant application, along with enforcing enhanced data sharing across HUD programs, would be a beneficial steps towards achieving a more efficient and accountable HUD. Public housing authorities under the supervision of HUD have operated unchecked and without consequence. Many routinely fail to meet basic HUD quality standards with no commitment to improving operations. Requiring such PHAs to timely and accurately report overpayments should be a condition of their funding. Republicans want HUD to provide the most effective housing for Americans as possible. Fraud and overpayments take valuable dollars away from that mission. One thing is very clear: HUD cannot continue on its current path. Things need to change. That's why I sent a letter to the GAO asking for a report on HUD's improper payments and fraud risk management structure. I believe that with President Trump's DOGE committee, proper congressional oversight, and Secretary Turner at the helm, a new day at HUD is soon approaching. I yield back. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 4 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the witness for appearing, and I will add for the record, I have great respect for this witness and will enjoy hearing his testimony. Mr. Chairman, I have received a memo dated April 3rd, 2025. This is from the majority, and I'll read in part what it says. It says, this hearing will underscore the critical oversight and review by the Department of Government Oversight and Efficiency, DOGE, to ensure transparency, accountability, and operational effectiveness within the agency. I regret to inform my colleagues first that DOGE is not a department. It is not. DOGE is an entity that replaced another entity that was created by President Barack Obama. It's an administrative agency at best. DOGE, which is headed by a temporary employee, Mr. Elon Musk, temporary because he's there for about 130 days, and then he'll be gone. DOGE is a temporary entity, not a department. Some things bear repeating. And I say this because it's important for us to note that the person who is heading DOGE has not been elected, has not been vetted. And for Republicans to now decide that they are going to turn the review of certain practices within the department, the Housing and Urban Development Department, turn it over to a person who is unvetted, a person who has not been elected, is unthinkable. This hearing should be about whether we should allow DOGE to be involved with our government. The hearing should be about whether or not DOGE has the authority to do much of what it's doing. The stock market is in turmoil. People are very much concerned about what's happening to them in this country. Economic uncertainty is pervasive, and we have a jester with a chainsaw cutting jobs. And we find ourselves today, this very powerful committee, the powerful Financial Services Committee, with oversight authority in this subcommittee. This powerful committee is allowing its very responsibility to be usurped, or in fact, we are abdicating. Abdication of the power of the committee to an unelected, unvetted, temporary employee. Now, why are we doing it? Friends, I regret to inform you of something more. Because there is fear of Elon Musk. People are afraid of him. They're afraid to take him on. They're afraid to ask him to come before this body, this august body, and give testimony. He should be in that seat. He's the person who's going to make the cuts. He's the person who has demonstrated that he has power beyond that which Congress has accorded him. He should be here, but we don't have the courage to have him sit in that seat and allow us to ask him questions. Mr. Musk is at best a wannabe president who serves with a wannabe dictator who believes that he has the power and the authority to literally control not only the executive branch, but also the legislative branch, as well as the judiciary. We, at some point, have to draw a line in the dirt and say to Mr. Musk, no more. You can't do this. You can't just willy-nilly, arbitrarily, and capriciously cut jobs. You have to do studies. You have to get some insight. And I'd like to ask, Mr. Chairman, at this time that, without objection, my memorandum from the majority be placed in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. I yield back.
Chairman yields. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Hill, for 1 minute.
I want to thank the Acting Inspector General for appearing before us today. I want to thank Subcommittee Chair Muser for holding this hearing. HUD's an important mission, providing safe and affordable housing to Americans. Unfortunately, over the years, in my view, the agency has shown time and time again they are unable to perform even the most basic functions. The agency continually fails to hold local public housing authorities responsible for not providing safe housing. For example, in my hometown in Little Rock, the Little Rock Housing Authority has allowed the residents of one complex to live in unsafe conditions without electricity while the owners of the complex collect utility payments. It's an outrage. Additionally, the problems in Little Rock Housing Authority included unauthorized transfers of funds, deceased citizens receiving housing vouchers, and over $700,000 in CARES Act funds unaccounted for, just to name a few. These issues are not limited to one public housing agency. This is a rampant nationwide issue that must be addressed, and HUD must be able to exercise appropriate oversight of its programs, or else billions of dollars of taxpayer resources will continue to be at risk of fraud and improper payments. And I look forward to our hearing today. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Waters, for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Trump and Musk are dismantling the nation's housing agencies and raising housing costs with tariffs on some building materials, while this committee pretends nothing unusual is happening. Committee Democrats and I have sent 3 letters to and requested a briefing from HUD Secretary Turner. I've also asked Chair Hill to invite him to testify. We have received 0 responses. Republicans who have been instructed to not hold town halls anymore, scared by what the public will think if Turner has to answer for how Trump is running our housing market and economy. Hopefully, my Republican colleagues will uphold their oath to protect the Constitution and the American people and finally conduct oversight of HUD. I wish I had more time. I would talk about the entire dysfunction of this government under Trump, all of the recalling that they have to do, the changes they have to make. Even our nuclear program was at risk because they fired the employees and then had to call them back. I could go on and on and on. If you want to talk about dysfunction, let's talk about what is happening with this administration. I yield back.
Lady yields back. I'll now introduce our witness. Today, we welcome the testimony of Mr. Stephen M. Begg, the Acting Inspector General of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Mr. Begg was appointed Deputy Inspector General in July of 2020. He previously was the OIG Chief of Staff, and before that was an attorney advisor to the OIG's Office of Legal Counsel. Mr. Begg earned his bachelor's degree from James Madison University, his law degree from the Catholic University of America, Columbus School of Law. We thank you for taking the time to be here. You will be recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your testimony. Without objection, your written statement will be made part of the record. Mr. Begg, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for your oral remarks.
Chairman Muser, Ranking Member Green, members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify about the important oversight work that the HUD Office of Inspector General does to detect and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse, and to promote integrity, efficiency, and effectiveness in HUD programs. My testimony will focus on several long-standing challenges that HUD faces and actions that can be taken to address them. HUD's portfolio is massive, and its programs affect every community in America. HUD programs provide hundreds of billions of dollars in grant funding, as well as trillions of dollars in mortgage insurance and mortgage-backed securities. HUD oversees a vast network of participants that administer its programs, including public housing authorities, landlords, nonprofit organizations, state and local government entities, and mortgage lenders and servicers. HUD needs a highly skilled workforce, efficient processes, and up-to-date technology to effectively manage a portfolio of this size. In recent years, HUD has sustained progress in key areas like financial management and human capital management. However, we have consistently reported that HUD struggles to maintain the capacity needed to tackle its most pressing challenges. A common theme across those challenges is the need to modernize HUD's IT systems. HUD needs better data to improve performance and ensure funding is spent properly. The key to collecting and leveraging that data is IT modernization. Inadequate systems and lack of data affect many critical HUD program functions, like monitoring grantee activities and performance, particularly subrecipients, preventing duplication of benefits and ineligible use of funds in disaster recovery programs, and ensuring HUD-assisted properties are inspected timely and that the health and safety problems identified are addressed quickly. Documenting the number of public housing units that contain lead hazards and monitoring the confirmed cases of lead poisoning of children. Measuring public housing authority performance in maximizing success rates in the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and protecting HUD systems and personally identifiable information from cybersecurity threats. HUD IT systems and data limitations also frustrate its ability to identify and prevent improper payments and fraud. For 8 consecutive years, HUD has not been able to estimate how many improper payments are made in its largest rental assistance programs, because its current systems do not have the payment data needed to test for improper payments. These programs represented approximately $50 billion in 2024, roughly 2/3 of HUD's annual expenditures. Because it cannot estimate and identify improper payments in these programs, HUD cannot develop specific action plans to reduce them, leaving tens of billions of dollars at increased risk each year. HUD needs to collect more information about payments made at the ground level to prevent taxpayer funds from being spent improperly. HUD can also better leverage data from other agencies, such as Treasury's Do Not Pay portal, to ensure that payments are not made to those who have been excluded from participating in federal programs or have disqualifying delinquent debt. With better data, HUD can prevent improper payments rather than chase them. The same is true of fraud. Having better data related to payments and subrecipient level activities is necessary to target fraud schemes proactively. Our office continues to stress the need for stronger fraud risk management practices at HUD. That starts with a commitment to preventing fraud from HUD leadership. In my first meeting with Secretary Turner, he expressed a strong desire to strengthen the department's anti-fraud practices and improve payment integrity, and to hold HUD program participants accountable for doing the same. HUD can put this commitment into action by assessing each of its programs for fraud risks and developing a proactive approach for fraud prevention. HUD should require its program participants to establish fraud risk programs in their organizations and provide guidance to them on how they should manage fraud risk. Ultimately, reducing improper payments and preventing fraud will better position HUD and its partners to maximize taxpayer funds in achieving the goals and outcomes intended in its programs. The OIG stands ready to assist the department in these efforts. To conclude, I'm proud to represent the dedicated professionals at HUD OIG, and I want to thank them for their outstanding effort to help HUD be successful. I look forward to continuing our work with this subcommittee and answering your questions today.
Thank you, Mr. Begg. We'll now turn to member questions, and the chair will now recognize myself, for 5 minutes. Mr. Begg, thank you for your very sound testimony and goal-oriented. That's very important. This hearing is very important. HUD is very important. Our goal is to improve Housing and Urban Development Department, not to only to point out the problems, although we need to point out the problems, the inherent problems, in order to truly focus on where the corrections need to take place. So just keep in mind, this is to be constructive so we can actually make a difference moving forward. That's all of our goals. So, Mr. Begg, you're speaking quite a bit about modernizing the IT systems at HUD. I do know something about this, as I mentioned earlier, from my previous time in state government. Can you talk about that a little bit more? How will modernizing IT improve the effectiveness, the efficiencies, and as well as the proper allocation of the all-important funds to those who benefit from the HUD program?
Thank you for the question. Modernizing IT across HUD has many potential values, but in terms of effectiveness, many of the systems, as you mentioned, were designed a long time ago. They don't match the current state of programs, and they don't capture enough data for HUD to know how well it's performing in its programs and how well its partners are. So much of the monitoring effort that HUD has to undertake is manual, and the information that HUD receives about how grants are being executed, it's difficult to digest for HUD staff. It's inefficient. GAO has pointed out it's confusing and hard for HUD staff to even read the information that comes through. So,
Do you plan on providing us some sort of plan on what type of IT systems? Is this something that we can work together on?
absolutely.
Because it's very important, I think. And if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Begg, just speak up a little bit more if you wouldn't mind, or lean in closer to the mic.
Sure.
So your 2024 report highlights that HUD cannot produce reliable estimates of improper payments. This is a real problem because we have over $100 billion, over $200 billion, according to the GAO, not just from HUD, of course, but government across all departments. So you had 2017, the last time a report was done, was $1.7 billion, which after the 4 years of high inflation, $2.2 billion adjusted for inflation today. Are we working on something to resume this in reporting? And if not, what is the main barrier to providing such reports?
We are working closely with HUD on finding a solution. The key here is technology and collecting the data. The information that's needed is local rent payment data that's managed in a distributed way across the nation. HUD has to manually collect it to do that. Technology is the key to solving that problem.
Okay, thank you. What penalties for those who have mismanaged funds, fail to report funds, or defraud our government, our taxpayers, are being instituted at the present time?
The options in terms of penalties from a regulatory perspective include HUD can issue corrective action orders that become part of their contracts with housing authorities. They can require them to repay funds with non-federal funding.
Would these IT systems and other solutions you have, would that have prevented the theft and corruption at the New York City Housing Authority that led to 70 bribery charges in a single day? Did you find that level of prosecution acceptable?
We are certainly pleased with the prosecutorial results of that investigative work, which we played a big part in. But to say that technology could solve for that, I can't say it would go that far, but could go a long way in detecting and giving a chance to prevent.
Okay. Do grantees and public housing authorities currently have to submit any type of fraud prevention plan before receiving HUD funds?
I don't believe so.
Okay, is that something you might consider?
We would see that as very valuable.
Okay. Last month, I introduced the Payment Information Integrity Reform Act, which requires federal agencies to create stronger financial management plans to reduce payment errors, creates an overpayment czar at the OMB, and lays out penalties for agencies that consistently fail to follow payment integrity laws. Do you think these changes would drive faster reform at HUD?
We do, and many of the requirements as proposed match with recommendations that our office in GAO has made for strengthening federal programs against fraud, so we do.
Great. Over the past 4 years, I mentioned in my beginning testimony that went from the funding from HUD went from $45 billion to $78 billion. Did that have any sort of ratio to improvements at HUD?
HUD has made a number of improvements across the board. That is a direct result of some of the funding, but the funding does increase the risk.
My time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Begg. I now call on the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Waters, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you very much. I'm going to quickly try and get a couple of questions in. Could you tell me how did DOGE come into HUD? Did they come in with employees? Did they have a previous meeting? Did they have analysis of what was going on with HUD? Who did they talk to? And how did they get the records quickly?
Thank you for the question, ma'am. It's my understanding that the HUD DOGE lead and DOGE team members have met with many program offices, possibly all of them, in terms of how they've obtained access. I don't know how those determinations have been made, but I understand that they are working closely with program staff across the department to make
How many
assessments.
program officers are you talking about?
I can't say definitively, but it's my understanding that they're working with all program offices.
And when did that start? Before or after the inauguration?
I can't say for certain.
You don't know.
I do not know the specific
What
date.
and how did they access the records?
It's my understanding that the HUD DOGE team personnel have been assigned to be employees of HUD, and so they can be granted access to HUD systems like any other HUD employee.
Who granted access?
I don't know specifically who granted access.
Was there some authorization by HUD personnel for them to do what they were doing?
There would have to be an authorization from the system owners at HUD to grant access.
Did this authorization take place?
I believe so.
But do you know so?
I don't know specifically when it occurred or who authorized it.
Okay, all right. So we don't know how they operate because it says, we understand there had been delegated authorities by HUD personnel to illegally withhold and claw back housing funds appropriated by Congress. Do you know about that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
According to court documents, the Trump administration claims the DOGE had been delegated authorities by HUD personnel to illegally withhold and claw back housing funds appropriated by Congress. Do you know about that?
With respect to the delegations, that sounds consistent with my answer before. That would make sense that HUD personnel would authorize DOGE
It would make
personnel.
sense, was it done?
I'm sorry?
Was there authorization by somebody, some people?
That would be the process by which,
I beg your pardon?
the process by which DOGE personnel would get access to a system would come from a
What is the
delegation.
process? For example, would they talk with the existing CEO of HUD, the second in charge, the third in charge? How does that work?
I can't say specifically who gave the authorizations. The delegations would flow down from the secretary to senior officials at HUD.
Since you have been named, have you investigated what authorizations each DOGE staffer has been granted and who granted the authorizations?
We have not reviewed that.
And whether those grants of authority adhere to federal law? Have you examined that?
We have not.
The lack of oversight of those actions and process is deeply concerning and inherently inefficient. So based on what you have learned since you've been there in a short period of time, are you concerned at all about the funding process and whether or not those who are eligible for funding, the programs all over the country, are being undermined in some way?
We're absolutely monitoring the situation. It's currently in litigation. We're tracking the situation. We communicate with HUD leadership about it regularly. We're monitoring the situation for sure.
What do you plan on doing now in your job?
Well, what we focused on right now as decisions are being made is communicating regularly with HUD leadership, career and political staff about the need to maintain capacity across the department. I mentioned in my opening statement, capacity has been a struggle for a long time, and any adjustments to the programs and the staff should.
You've served as deputy for a long time or something.
Since 2020.
Did Elon Musk come and talk to you?
I have not spoken to Mr. Musk.
Did he come to HUD?
I can't say for sure. I have not seen him in the
Who
building.
did he delegate to talk to you?
There's a HUD DOGE team lead.
I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Arkansas, Chairman Hill, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. And again, Acting Inspector General, thank you for being with us today. As I noted in my opening comments, the Metropolitan Housing Allowance in Little Rock has faced significant financial mismanagement, failing property conditions, and leadership instability for years. As Chairman, ensuring HUD works for the American people and not against the American people is a priority for me. HUD has been long aware of the mismanagement at the Metropolitan Housing Authority, and yet issues persist. How, in your view, should HUD engage with troubled public housing authorities like the one in my district?
Thank you for the question. Oversight of troubled housing authorities is a very challenging endeavor, and the best answer to your question is engaging with housing authorities before they become troubled. When housing authorities become substandard, really working with them closely to avoid a scenario where they get into a troubled status, because it's very hard to get out of it once you're in it.
Yeah. And so, in other words, trying to be proactive at the local office and the regional office, in your view, should be a priority. But in your view, has that been a systemic problem at HUD? How many public housing agencies are classified as troubled by HUD?
I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I don't believe it's a substantial number compared to the overall footprint of over 3,000 housing authorities. But what you said about my view on the topic is correct.
And how should new HUD leadership, and every time we have a new HUD secretary, we have a new way to turn the page and do it differently. If you're advising Secretary Turner, how can he achieve that proactive approach? And how could we see better enforcement of housing rules by, again, the local HUD office versus, or a regional office?
Well, again, it starts with systems. The current systems that HUD uses to manage its public and Indian housing portfolio lack key data inputs. They rely on self-certification from housing authorities, and the information that's available to HUD to monitor them is challenging to work with. Enhancing those systems, getting better data in real time would allow HUD staff a better chance of working with more housing authorities to avoid a scenario where they become troubled because the staff is limited in capacity on how many housing authorities they can really dedicate time to.
And do you find that HUD's approach, in addition to being slow, is too deferential to the local housing authority to try to solve essentially try to solve its own problem, and therefore they're just letting it fester with the local officials not hearing directly from federal oversight?
I don't know if it's deferential as much as a true capacity challenge. There are so many issues in the portfolio, both in the physical conditions of property and then the execution of the programs, that I don't think there are enough people to work with all the housing authorities, and there's not enough information available to them to do it efficiently.
But if I told you a particular multifamily housing complex that took Section 8 vouchers, who was routinely failing local property code inspections, routinely the site of police multiple times a week pursuing criminal activity, and that the local housing authority, the local HUD office, consistently let that owner have access to the Section 8 voucher program, would that concern you?
Yes, but unfortunately, it's a common occurrence. The affordable housing supply is in such a shortage that many times the HUD staff is forced to try to find alternatives that don't exist. And so sometimes the best option is to try to continue to work out of the scenario. Sometimes they work it out and sometimes they don't.
Well, here it was an outrage by the local city council, and nothing was done at the Metropolitan Housing Authority, nothing was done at HUD, nothing was done at the Fort Worth Regional Office, and finally the state attorney general had to take action and bring criminal charges against the landowner in this case, and there was an $11 million judgment. I think that's a situation run amok. I think all this could have been stopped by just the most basic oversight with bad systems or not. So we look forward to working with you on how to improve accountability at HUD. I thank the chairman and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. Williams, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Muser and Ranking Member Green. Under former HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge, y'all HUD's mission was very clear: create strong, sustainable, inclusive communities and quality, affordable homes for all. So I'm curious today, exactly what part of that mission statement are President Trump and his billionaire buddy against? Let's start with the part about building strong, sustainable, inclusive communities. How is Trump and Musk building on this with firing so many HUD staff that it can't even carry out its statutory requirements? Trump and Musk are illegally firing hundreds of HUD staff, including Trump's own former HUD Inspector General, and closing critically needed field offices. All of this is happening when I know, just as my Republican colleagues know, just as our witness said today, that we still face a housing affordability and availability crisis in this country. Y'all, this isn't about cutting waste, because that's something that we can all agree on. You should see how I pinch a penny in my monthly budget. My husband will let you know, and my son, who wants to shop all the time, but we just can't. So we get that. This is about destroying and dismantling HUD while our communities back home are left to suffer these disastrous decisions of Trump and Musk that my Republican colleagues are enabling. This is the exact opposite of what HUD was doing under the leadership of Democratic former Secretary Marcia Fudge. So, how about the next part of HUD's former mission statement? Creating quality, affordable homes for all. With the reckless Trump tariffs, taxing hard-working Americans and massive cuts to federal housing, the Trump-Musk administration is making housing even more unaffordable for folks back home while giving tax cuts to billionaires. The bottom line is Trump is prioritizing his billionaire buddies and personal vendettas over what's right for the household budgets of hard-working American families. To sum it all up, Trump and Musk are on the track to widen the racial wealth gap and increase housing insecurity for families and communities across the country that we were all sent here to represent. And the only way that we're going to stop this is stop them from making American families pay for billionaire tax cuts is if we expose them. And then together, Democrats and Republicans must demand better from our government. So let's do that today. Mr. Begg, Elon Musk and DOGE gain access to the personal confidential data of the American people through government databases. DOGE gained access to HUD's enforcement management system, which contains medical records, financial files, social security numbers, medical details, and the addresses of domestic violence survivors. What controls does HUD have in place to protect the data of the people of America from private entities seeking to exploit the data for their own personal and private gain?
Thank you for the question. In general, the data that you're mentioning is protected from improper disclosure under the Privacy Act. That's the primary legal control in place. HUD has a number of information security controls within its information security program that are designed to ensure that that information is not improperly released.
And
from the
Mr. Begg,
department.
who is enforcing that?
That would be the Chief Information Officer.
And do you have safeguards in place? Have you been aware that this data is being secured by the Chief Information Officer?
We do an annual review of their information security program.
So that has not yet been done since January 20th.
It's ongoing. So it would be, our review would include and it would look to identify any improper disclosures or removals of information from HUD systems.
So that's just one of the many concerns that I'm hearing about from constituents back home since January 20th. Another concern that I'm hearing a lot about is cancel HUD contracts. The city of Atlanta, which is in my district, has one of the widest racial wealth gaps in the country, and many of my constituents rely on HUD to help them just get a jump start. Mr. Begg, there are multiple fair housing advocates in my district, all of whom have shared concerns about DOGE's cuts at the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. One example is the Fair Housing Initiative Program's grant termination. On the night of February 27, 2025, HUD sent notices terminating 78 grant contracts effective immediately. These canceled contracts severely impacted communities in their long-time work to enforce the Fair Housing Act, protecting seniors, veterans, survivors of domestic violence, families with children, people of color and faith, LGBTQ+ individuals, underserved rural communities, and other people who've been victims of housing discrimination. Mr. Begg, can you speak to the contracts, agreements, or activities relating to fair housing that have been canceled or being considered for cancellation?
The cancellations are currently subject of litigation, and so what we're doing right now is monitoring the litigation to see what the outcome would be.
Mr. Begg, I'm sorry, my time has expired, but I would love an answer to this in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Loudermilk, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Begg, thank you for being here today. We're in interesting times in this country. And one thing of the 10 years that I have been in Congress, I have learned is that this city and the government love status quo. And part of the status quo is a lot of times turning your head to a problem or sticking your head in the sand and just ignoring it. But as over the past 10 years, one of my priorities has been finding areas of waste and fraud within our government. And that has been a priority of this administration. That has upended the status quo, and it has a lot of people uncomfortable. But they should be. But one thing that I have learned is through my 10 years in Congress, we've uncovered a lot of areas of fraud and waste. But they still exist today because we're handcuffed by our own laws that we can't get rid of the perpetrators of the fraud and waste because they're protected. And that's why I have introduced again for the 6 years now, the Merit Act, which would reform our employment laws and policies in the federal government to allow for a reasonable time of termination of bad employees, not the current 24 to 48 months. And I just bring that up because regardless of what you find or what we find, unless we can get rid of those who are doing these the wasteful spending of taxpayer dollars, we're never going to do anything. But what this city is good of is doing oversight and reports and rarely fixing problems. So Mr. Begg, HUD Secretary Turner recently announced the creation of a DOGE task force to help uncover the waste, fraud, and abuse that we all want to get rid of. What is the relationship of this task force to your office and the HUD IG?
We have coordinated at a high level with the HUD DOGE lead and offered to collaborate on combating fraud, waste, and abuse in the department. We've offered examples of significant open HUD recommendations that, if action was taken on them, would generate significant cost savings. And so we've been communicative with the HUD DOGE team lead and the HUD leadership about our interest in working together to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse.
Thank you. Can you explain the difference between fraud and fraud risk?
Well, fraud is something, potential fraud and fraud risk is something that can be identified in data, but verifying it and validating it and then adjudicating it in court requires a human effort beyond just a data exercise.
So how severe is the fraud risk at HUD?
It's significant. Many of HUD's programs are decentralized in terms of how the money moves. So it moves from HUD to a grantee, to a sub-grantee, to a contractor. Each time it goes through a layer, the risk of improper payments and fraud increases.
So how does that compare with the actual instances of fraud that you've seen?
It's hard to say. In some instances, we're asking to prove a negative here because we're not able to quantify the things that we don't know about, and without it, data sources for us to test against and to really come up with good estimates, which HUD's been unable to do for a long time, it's hard for us to quantify how much is out there that we're not able to see.
Is HUD responsible for mitigating fraud within its programs, or is fraud risk management largely delegated to the public housing authorities?
Well, HUD's responsible, we believe, under the law for managing fraud risk in its programs and responsible for ensuring that its grantees have strong fraud risk management programs as well.
Okay. Over the years, HUD has struggled to incorporate common sense accountability measures into its programs. Why is that?
It's a good question. I think that the folks who are operating the programs at HUD are doing their best to incorporate, those common sense approaches. But many of the programs are designed for flexibility, and anytime flexibility is introduced in the use of funding, it creates opportunities for it to be misused. It's a difficult balance between flexible grant programs for communities and trying to put internal controls in place to make sure that the money is spent appropriately, but we think more can be done on the control side.
What else can HUD do to mitigate fraud risk?
Well, the first step, like I mentioned, is assessing each program for fraud, and this is a basic concept. Just sit down with the people who run the program, get it in front of a whiteboard and say, if I wanted to steal from it, how would I do it? And you'd list it all out. We could be part of that discussion as well. We investigate and help prosecute cases, and then think about how can you stop it within your program? What systems do you have in place? What potential controls are there to mitigate it? Test those and start the cycle over again.
All right, thank you. My time has run out. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from California, Mr. Liccardo, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Begg, thank you for coming to testify today. The purpose, the function of your office, Office of Inspector General, is fair to say primarily to help identify waste, fraud, and abuse so they can be rectified and to ensure the department follows the law in executing its mission. Is that fair?
That's correct. I'd add to that we also have a big emphasis on making recommendations to make programs more efficient and effective.
As part of those recommendations, you present semi-annual reports to Congress, and I think based on your written testimony, quite a lot of work had been done over the last year in fiscal year 24. For example, your work resulted, I say your work, the work of your office, resulted in almost $87 million in collections, identifying nearly $1 billion in funds that could be put to better use. Is that fair?
That's correct.
Your investigations resulted in more than $63 million in restitution, more than $14 million in total recoveries. and in 125 administrative sanctions to remove or limit bad actors from participation in HUD programs.
That's correct.
And you had identified 278 HUD actions that produce systemic benefits for the programs and participants and beneficiaries. Is that fair?
Yes.
Thank you for all that great work. And that work was done certainly not just by you, but by others in the office, and of course by your predecessor. I know you're acting, but the predecessor Inspector General was Ray Davis. Is that right?
That's correct. Our team at HUD OIG does the work, not me.
And when the executive branch, in this case HUD, does not follow the law, what typically should happen? What are the remedies the Inspector General is involved in?
Well, it depends on the context. In a scenario where someone's not following the law and violating criminal provisions, we would work with the Department of Justice to prosecute bad actors. In an instance where the department might not be following the law, the Payment Information Integrity Act, that noncompliance results in reporting requirements to Congress. We publicly report their noncompliance. They're required to work with OMB on corrective action, so it really depends on the context.
But there is a sanction, there's a consequence.
Yes,
Now, you became acting Inspector General on January 24th, is that right?
correct.
President Trump became president on January 20th. Is that fair?
Yes,
So you took this role 4 days after President Trump took office because Ray Davis was fired by President Trump.
that's right.
Now, federal law requires the president to follow a process when terminating Inspector General. Senator Grassley, as I understand, a Republican senator, authored an amendment that was approved by Congress to mandate that the president provide Congress 30 days advance notice before terminating Inspector General. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that notice would include written and detailed communication about the rationale for the termination.
That's right.
Why would there need to be protections in place from the politicization of the termination of an Inspector General?
I believe the genesis of those protections was designed to protect the independence of offices of Inspector General.
And that independence is incredibly important for you to do your job and detect waste, fraud, and abuse, identify conflicts of interest and the like.
Absolutely, it's the backbone of what we do.
Did the president follow the law in this case?
The notices were not provided consistent with the law, it's my understanding.
You know, I know Chairman Hill raised a lot of important issues with regard to poor maintenance at public housing. I think that's been well detailed in the media, and I think in every community there's been a lot of discussion of that. That maintenance is paid for by a capital fund. Is that right?
Yes.
And that is allocated by Congress, that funding. Is that fair?
Yes.
And I believe that 10 months ago, the National Association of Housing Redevelopment Officials increased its estimate of the backlog of repairs needed for existing public housing stock from $70 billion to $90 billion. And its words, all due to Congress chronically underfunding the Public Housing Capital Fund. Are you aware of that?
I am aware of the report and the figures.
And in your view, is the disrepair and poor maintenance, while undoubtedly there's plenty of waste, fraud, and abuse in this agency and any other, is it primarily the result of waste or underfunding?
The need for funding is certainly an important contributing factor in this scenario. The funding has not kept pace with the needs, and so the critical problems that generate long-term physical condition issues at properties has not been addressed. So you can paint the mold on the wall, but if you don't fix
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you. I yield.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Moore, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Begg, thank you for coming before the committee today. I have a slightly different series of questions than some of the folks who've spoken already. Back last September, Western North Carolina was significantly impacted by Hurricane Helene. Estimates are in our state alone roughly $80 billion in damage. Families and businesses lost everything because of where this happened. Most folks didn't have any kind of flood insurance of any kind. Estimates are indicating that it could be around $15 billion needed for housing assistance and recovery alone. So just an absolutely immense amount. I can tell you that after the aftermath, I witnessed, firsthand the resilience of the folks in my district and throughout Western North Carolina. Our state legislature that I was a member of last year stepped up and provided some amazing relief to get funds out there and resources out there to help deal with this catastrophe. And I got to say, folks in North Carolina stepped out in a significant way to help one another, and folks from outside the state, volunteers, you name it. One of the questions that kept coming up and where folks were scratching their head was, the federal response. And I have to say that the federal response prior to this year was very lacking, particularly as it pertains to HUD and on the housing side. A lot of folks were not being told exactly what to expect. They were getting, I guess, for lack of a better word, the runaround. They weren't even sure what resources were being made available. There were folks having their temporary housing potentially going to be cut off. I mean, just a lot of really bad things. I do have to say that after the new administration came in, a lot of that has significantly improved. Although it's not perfect, but it has improved. So we do appreciate that. But the Department of Housing and Urban Development Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Program is going to be a critical part of our long-term recovery. One of the things, though, that I don't fully understand it, frankly, as a member of Congress, is the formula that HUD uses to determine the CDBG DR allocations. As far as I know, that may not even be public. And so I guess that sort of fuels a number of questions. One is, what vulnerabilities to fraud or abuse are created by the lack of transparency in this allocation process?
Well, with respect to the allocation process, I'm not sure that we've studied how it contributes to potential fraud, waste, and abuse. There are a number of things that do contribute to that in the disaster program, but we haven't examined the allocation as a contributor to that.
Well, would you believe that it's essential that the CDBG DR money is spent in helping these communities recover?
Absolutely.
And so in January of 2024, of course, this was before your time, the HUD OIG launched an audit to determine whether 4 community development block grant disaster recovery grantees had made improper payments. According to y'all's office, the grantees have budgeted more than $904 million and had spent almost $356 million on completed and underway match activities. Do you know, again, this is before your time, but I don't know if you had a chance to look, why did their spending raise red flags?
Well, I was the Deputy Inspector General when we launched the audit, so I'm familiar with it. And the match program allows grantees to use HUD funding to contribute their match portion with other federal programs. The concern that we have is that HUD doesn't require grantees to report to them or track how they use match funds. So in our examination, we've seen instances where if the match requirement is 90% FEMA, 10% on the grantee, there are instances frequently where we see 90% FEMA, 90% HUD. And so grantees aren't tracking it, they're not reporting it to HUD, HUD's not able to monitor it, the data system doesn't capture it. That's our concern, is that HUD funding is just being wasted above the amount that's been authorized.
So I guess then, like, what kinds of payments is your office looking to identify and remedy?
It would be those that are above the match cap. Those are technically improper payments in our view.
Okay. And are you share the status of that audit?
We are in the process of issuing a report in that audit. We believe it will be in the coming months. We issued an interim report when we identified the lack of tracking to flag that issue for HUD because we thought they needed to take action on it immediately, but we will be issuing another report on the review soon.
Thank you, sir. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman yields. Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Herodopoulos, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Begg, for coming in today. We appreciate your candor in these answers, and as they we fire them at you right away. I think the area that I want to get into in the report is the frustration that these incidents, let's just say at least of curiosity or concern, are usually go unaddressed. It's got to be frustrating in your role that you make a solid recommendation and no one ever follows up on the darn thing. And I'm excited about what DOGE has done. It gives even more opportunity to put sunshine on some of these matters and maybe can make your job easier to make sure those reforms are done so the folks who want to buy a house or get in a better living condition can make use of the good programs that are available as opposed to the fraudsters who unfortunately take advantage of the system. So let me ask you a very wide open question. They might have gotten into it earlier, but can you give a number or estimate how many high priority recommendations still remain open or unimplemented after the recommendations were made by your group to HUD?
Yes, we issued our Priority Open Recommendations Report for 2024 last year, and of the 35 we identified, I believe 24 remain open. We're in the process of updating that report and issuing a new one here in the next coming weeks, but the number will be in that 20-30 zone.
And then, and if you can give a little color to the ones that were, quote, addressed. Did we see significant savings there? Or did we see arrests made, if fraud was conducted? What were the result of ones that were, quote, addressed?
Well, the recommendations that we're referencing are programmatic in nature. So we've seen enhancements in information security. We've seen HUD's rental assistance program offices take action to clarify guidance, to put protocols in place to better track health and safety issues. It's those types of issues that we're seeing.
And with that in mind too, I as a former business person myself, ROI is what we always look at. You know, what do you get the most bang for the buck? And the idea is that is there one that some of these recommendations that would yield the most results? In twofold. One is, of course, savings. Of course, we're looking for that given the budget shortfalls. But the other, more importantly, is to assist folks who truly need it and make sure the fraudsters are kind of addressed. But that said, which one of these recommendations would you put at the top of the list where you would get the most benefit so that we can kind of focus on that as opposed to just looking at a number, this last case being 35?
Sure. I'll give a twofold answer since you posed it two ways. In terms of fraud prevention, one of our priority open recommendations is creating stronger fraud risk management assessments across HUD's programs. If HUD starts the process of assessing those risks and builds prevention into its programs, that would reduce the negative impacts fraud has on its programs. With respect to financial recoveries, we did a review of how many people obtained FHA-insured loans who had delinquent federal tax debt. And in a one-year period, we estimated that $13 billion in FHA loans went to ineligible borrowers with federal tax debt, which would translate, in our view, to roughly a $6 billion monetary impact if you factor in the average loss rate for FHA on a mortgage. So taking action to obtain the tax information needed to prevent those ineligible borrowers from getting the loans in the first place could have a huge impact on HUD's Mutual Mortgage Insurance Fund.
With that in mind, Mr. Begg, whose fault was it that these were approved in the first place? Was it a fraudulent application, or was it the actions of the folks working at HUD who made a mistake?
It's hard to say. Our review examined how many folks with delinquent federal tax debt obtained loans. The reason or the state of mind they had in obtaining those loans, we didn't examine. But what needs to happen is HUD either needs to obtain that information, and HUD believes it may require congressional authority to get that information from the IRS, or it needs to require mortgage lenders to obtain that in their review of the applications.
I want to just close with this, Mr. Chairman. I think the frustration a lot of folks feel is that they feel like the resources are there, the misallocation of funds, put it simply. And whether it be with Medicaid, HUD, so many vital programs where people are truly in need. It could be the disabled or folks in nursing homes in the Medicaid world, or in this case, folks are just getting on their feet and they're doing the right thing. They do it lawfully, but the folks who break the law never suffer a penalty. I mean, at some point when people are either knowingly breaking the law, and it was shown by fact pattern, we have to put proverbially someone in handcuffs and say, you know, you're not going to defraud the United States anymore. And I think that the IG report needs to focus on simply who are the worst actors. And if folks are breaking the law, they're denying people benefits, let alone defrauding taxpayers. So I'm glad to see you lead this charge, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate you bringing the witness forth.
I thank the gentleman for his comments, well assessed. The gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Tlaib, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairman. Thank you, Acting Inspector General, for being here. I think a lot of us have a lot of questions. You know, I come from Detroit, the most beautiful, blackest, city in the country. And, you know, we used to have 70% home ownership. I mean, it was one of the most thriving communities where many of black families would come, create careers out of the auto industry and so much more. So I want to get straight at it. And Mr. Begg, this is important for my constituents at home. You know, you're a public servant now. Understand. You really do work for the American people. Even as you have somebody that appoints you, you still have a duty responsibility to the American people we represent. So under what authority can the administration withhold funding that has already been appropriated by Congress?
Thank you for the question. I'm not aware of an authority that an administration would be able to use to withhold funding that's been appropriated by Congress.
Okay, so the Trump administration just terminated $60 million in Section 4 funding. Are you familiar with that? So,
Yes.
Acting Inspector, this funding supports my district. I mean, Grandmont Rosedale Development Corporation relies heavily on Section 4 funding for years. Many of my seasoned residents who are on fixed income, right? As the prices of, you know, the housing crisis just continues to exacerbate, they rely, again, in organizations like that, being able to access that funding. Section 4 funding, canceling Section 4 funding threatens hundreds of housing projects around our nation right now. So, you know, it is mind-boggling, though, to me, you know, from, you know, Elon Musk and DOGE have reportedly called cutting the FHEO staff by 77%. That's from 572 employees down to 134 people. Because I've been here now going on 7 years, and one of the things that continues to come out in the previous Office of Inspector General report from 2024, that the primary obstacle to timely completion of any investigations was limited staffing. And I see that a lot. I always see people attacking the Social Security office, attacking the Postal Service. But when it came down to it, it was about the lack of capacity to deal with the rise of course, the need for many of our community members. So, Mr. Begg, if the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity was already struggling to meet its statutory requirements, Mr. Begg, statutory requirements, okay, for the Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity was already struggling, right? From existing staff, how can it effectively uphold fair housing laws with the face of 77% staffing cuts?
A 77% staffing cut is significant. And as you mentioned, we highlighted in our report, in our top management challenges report, and in our report on the 100-day investigation.
So have you started an investigation into the mass layoffs or the firings?
We have not started an investigation related to
I think you
layoffs and
should.
firings.
I think you should find out and really investigate into the firings and how that impacts the statutory requirement laws for the Fair Housing Equal Opportunity Division.
What I can say we've been doing is communicating with HUD leadership regularly and consistently about the status of the planned reductions and voicing our advocating for those decisions to be carefully considered and for any decision that's made to reduce HUD's footprint to take into account the need for capacity in each program and the challenges that already exist for capacity. We're having those conversations regularly. HUD leadership has been receptive to the information we're bringing to them, and we're monitoring decisions that haven't been made yet in many instances and looking for
I
opportunities.
don't know, my residents can't stop living. Like, we can't wait. These are programs, again, appropriated by Congress. Like, I don't understand. They don't have time to be waiting until we can kind of have a good conversation with the administration, either follow the law or don't, right? And I say that, again, we need to move with a lot more urgency and understanding that laws are being, this lawlessness, this recklessness, it will impact our residents. Really quick, you know, in February, when Secretary Turner announced the creation of DOGE task force at HUD, he charged it with eliminating fraud, waste, and abuse, as you probably are familiar. So, Mr. Begg, how are DOGE's activities not redundant with the activities and purpose of at your office? Isn't that what you do?
It is what we do.
So, is he doing your job?
He is not doing our job.
So why is DOGE trying to do your job right now?
I can't speak for the administration or the
That's right.
department or DOGE, but
I just need my colleagues to understand the depth of what's going on here. It's reckless and it's incredibly hurtful for many families. With that, I yield, Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady yields. The gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. De La Cruz, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to wave on to this hearing. This is a very important topic. HUD, as the Vice Chair of Housing Insurance Subcommittee, efficiency and a properly functioning HUD is of great importance and very important to me. In my district, HUD housing is something that we have in all of my district. Efficiency, identifying fraud, waste, and abuse, as you have done so, and thank you for your very candid response. In fact, some of the things that I heard is that you and your team have identified several areas where we can cut back on fraud, waste, and abuse. What was concerning to me is that you had in 2025 high priority items, 35 of them, which at the end of the year, 24 approximately were still open. When I looked at your office and the fact that the OIG had not been forced to testify in front of Congress, and that it had been 5 years since we had heard from your team about the fraud, waste, and abuse, I thought to myself, well, that's just unacceptable. As a small business owner myself, I regularly have meetings with my employees to say, where are you at? What is the temperature? What challenges are you facing? How can we help? And this is when I decided to create something to help us. One of my bills focused on preventing fraud, waste, and abuse at HUD is noticed in this hearing. It is H.R. 225, HUD Transparency Act of 2025, which last Congress passed with overwhelmingly support from both sides of the aisle, and it passed by voice vote on the House floor. The bill is really simple. It requires the HUD Office of Inspector General to testify annually before Congress. Again, very important. The need for this legislation is underscored by the fact that the HUD Inspector General's office, again, hadn't testified since 2023. Mr. Begg, having you here today and listening to what you have said furthers my resolve for the need for this bill. So my question to you is, as acting HUD IG, can you speak about the impact that pointed congressional attention in the form of a required annual HUD OIG testimony would have on HUD and the OIG's mission to help prevent fraud, waste, and abuse?
thank you for the question. We welcome the opportunity to come before this committee and our other committees of jurisdiction as requested to provide testimony. We are thrilled to have an opportunity to talk about the important work our staff is doing and also stress the need for actions that can help HUD be more successful.
So do you feel that by coming here on an annual basis and bringing your concerns to our committee, that will help further support the need to stop the waste and abuse and give you the tools that you need?
I do.
Excellent. Thank you. The last question that I have in the short minute is I also introduced another piece of legislation, which is ensuring access to the whistleblower Protections Act to provide whistleblower protections for employees of HUD contractors with contracts predating 2013. Section 4712, the anti-retaliation provisions. I know this is one of the first topics that you mention at the top of your management challenges report in FY25. So can you briefly share with us how important whistleblower protections are to help preventing fraud, waste, and abuse at HUD?
Whistleblowers are critically important for identifying fraud, waste, and abuse, and the thousands of contractors that HUD utilizes have many thousands of employees who have direct knowledge of and access to information that we would want to know about fraud, waste, and abuse. Ensuring that they're free from retaliation is key so that they feel protected to come forward. Without those protections, the chilling effect on them disclosing information that's critical to improving HUD programs is significant.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields. Gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Stile, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on Digital Assets, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding today's hearing. Mr. Begg, thanks for being here. I want to talk to you about the waste, fraud, and abuse that's occurring in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. As you may know, $2.8 million in rental assistance funds went to other purposes, went to payroll, to oversight, to administrators, not to helping people in the city of Milwaukee get housing, many of whom are challenged. We face national challenges with housing right now. But I want to talk about what went on. We have a new CFO at the Milwaukee Housing Authority who I know is engaged in this and trying to get this back on track. But what are the consequences for individuals who caused the problem? And what is the consequences across the board at HUD? Are people arrested? Are there charges made? What are the penalties? And how did this occur for years in the city of Milwaukee before this came to light?
Well, thank you for the question. We're acutely aware of the scenario in Milwaukee. It's one we've been tracking, and it's one that we've considered doing our own oversight over. And quite frankly, it's a crowded room there. There are many, many people looking at this issue now based on the status. But in terms of penalties, if employees of a housing authority are found to have misused federal funding, we would investigate those potential crimes and refer them for prosecution. We would work with HUD's Office of General Counsel to seek to debar them from federal programs, and we would seek any other potential administrative penalties for others involved in the actions.
I appreciate you engaging on this and being serious. I think the new administration, the Trump-appointed administration at HUD, we have a big opportunity to get to the bottom of the waste, fraud, and abuse, because what we want to do is actually help people who are challenged and need the assistance. What we don't want to see is it going into programs that it's not designed for. But walk me through how no penalties came to be over the course of 3 years, in particular as it relates to the $2.8 million in misused funds, the Milwaukee Housing Authority.
Well, if you're referring to penalties from HUD, I can't speak to their specific decision-making, but they do have penalties and remedies available to them, which can include limiting and withholding assistance to housing authorities.
And at what point does HUD apply those penalties?
That's a discretionary function for the program offices to decide. It's a policy call for them ultimately. In many instances, they will try to work with housing authorities to get out of troubled or difficult situations where things aren't going correctly before going to the penalties. Because I mentioned earlier, there aren't a lot of non-federal funds available from housing authorities to pay penalties. So if you withhold new funding from them,
we enter a catch-22 once there's a bad problem, which kind of brings the question of how problems like this stem and grow over a period of years before they're caught. Is there an unwillingness, do you think, in some housing authorities to correct bad behavior?
I wouldn't say that. What I would say is that many housing authorities are facing the same capacity challenges that HUD and its staff are facing. They frequently don't have adequate systems in place. They might not have processes in place necessary to run efficiently and effectively, and they have a large charge, and frequently it's one that's difficult for them to manage. So the problems snowball over time.
But it seems to me, at least, that HUD appears asleep at the wheel. while this is ongoing in the city of Milwaukee, that this isn't being covered and held accountable, because you're exactly right. The longer it takes for this to come to light, these penalties are simply pulling money back from a system that doesn't have it because the money was swindled in the first place, which puts us in a catch-22 and shows the need to investigate this and hold people accountable in the first place. Let me go big picture, because I think one of the questions is, are the people who are engaged in this inappropriate behavior nervous of being caught? How often is HUD applying penalties? Is HUD arresting people, making charges across the board to housing authorities across the United States when they see this type of waste, fraud, and abuse?
Well, what I can tell you is our office is responsible for doing the criminal investigations, and almost half of our portfolio is dedicated to public corruption in these programs.
But how often are people actually held accountable?
We could point to investigative case outcomes, prosecutions, sentencing weekly. It happens all the time, and in many ways, we're only scratching the tip of the iceberg.
That's my concern, is we're only scratching the tip of the iceberg, your words. That's my concern, is that we're not taking this seriously enough to root out the waste, fraud, and abuse, because every dollar that is wasted inside HUD is a dollar that's not going to improving the housing or providing access to individuals who do need housing. Appreciate the work you're doing at HUD and others to root out this waste, fraud, and abuse. Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding the hearing. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Garbarino, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Begg, for coming here today. 2024 was a record-setting year for the New York City Housing Authority, but it was just for the right reason. In February of 2024, 70 NYCHA, current and former superintendents and staff were arrested for allegedly pocketing bribes in exchange for granting no-bid or micro-contract repair work. This 10-year, $2 million classic pay-for-play corruption scheme was the largest number of federal bribery arrests brought in a single day in DOJ history, and included public housing employees at developments in every borough. The employees had the power to hand out smaller micro-purchase contracts of $5,000, which increased to $10,000 after 2019, that fell below the amounts that triggered competitive bidding. The contractors would then pay kickbacks to NYCHA employees who awarded the contract. Mr. Begg, following this incident, your office released a report examining NYCHA's findings. Its mitigation processes are largely reactionary. NYCHA is the largest public housing authority in the United States, correct?
That's correct.
And NYCHA receives billions in federal funding from HUD each year?
I believe over $3 billion.
In fact, NYCHA receives over 25% of HUD's rental assistance funding nationwide.
Correct.
Yet the report found that NYCHA did not assess fraud risks across the entire organization. In fact, NYCHA did not develop a process to identify fraud risks. It did not develop a response plan, and it did not implement a process to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of fraud risk management activities. As the largest public housing authority in the United States, one would hope that they would be more organized or better organized. Mr. Begg, I understand that it varies amongst housing authorities. I worked at a law firm before I came to Congress that represented a housing authority. We did not have this problem. But I would say that, would you venture to say that these failures are common across other public housing authorities?
I would. And with respect to NYCHA, it's a sophisticated organization. They have many things that are in place. They have a lot of anti-fraud activities that are happening across their programs. They're just not structured in a way that's coordinated across the organization and proactive. And so in many instances, they're actually farther along than most housing authorities. They're leading the pack, but they still have room to go. So we do think that these issues are very pervasive at other housing authorities.
That's kind of scary that you said that they're further along than other housing authorities, but this is still happening. Still happening there. It just happened last year. What can HUD do to provide more guidance when it comes to mitigating public housing authority fraud risk?
Well, first, they need to assess the risks in each of the programs that housing authorities operate. HUD needs to do that and identify what it sees fraud risks as, and then require housing authorities to have anti-fraud programs that meet the standards that GAO's established for federal programs, and then give them guidance on how to meet those expectations and work with them to strengthen those anti-fraud controls over time.
Do the fraud risks vary by size of a housing authority? Or like, is it, if they do an assessment, does one cover NYCHA all the way down to a small town housing authority, or how does?
They do vary depending on the size. And we recommended in that report that PIH assess fraud risks at large housing authorities like NYCHA. The no-bid contracts that you mentioned, in a large organization where there are many of them happening all the time, it is hard to oversee low-dollar contracts. But if you're in a small housing authority that may have only a handful of people, you're not going to have that kind of traffic. At the smaller housing authorities, the issues are usually a lack of segregation of duties. One person controls the money and the accounting, and so there's no one to know whether it's gone missing.
And so it sounds like a lack of formal guidance is a factor in lack of formal guidance from HUD is a factor in this risk of fraud. How often does HUD terminate or suspend funding due to underperformance or fraudulent activity?
I don't have the answer to that off the top of my head. Be happy to get back to you on that.
I have my last question. Public housing authorities have a governance structure. Should there be reforms or the makeup of those boards that could result in a more competent or effective board?
I think that depends on the context in terms of governance, but I know that governance structures across the PHA space have been a challenge.
I'm out of time. Thank you very much for being here today. I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, the ranking member of Oversight and Investigations, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And friends, for reasons that I shall not announce, I believe the chairman to be an honorable person, and I want to make that a part of the record today. Mr. Begg, excuse me, are there people in this country who engage in invidious discrimination when it comes to housing?
Yes.
And do these people engage in a form of invidious discrimination that would deny a person access to housing because of color?
Yes.
And is there a department within HUD that deals with this invidious discrimination?
Yes, the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity.
And have you heard, sir, that there is a possibility of substantial cuts in personnel in this department?
Yes.
Have you heard a number, sir?
I've seen the reporting, and I think it was mentioned earlier in the hearing, 77% was a possibility.
And if 77% of the persons charged with enforcement are removed from their positions, what would this portend for people who are seeking housing without being discriminated against?
Well, we discussed the already strained capacity in that office earlier, so a significant cut could increase the strain on capacity. What we would want to see in a plan is how HUD plans to account for that reduced staff. What other tools or alternatives would it use to prevent the capacity from going too low that it can't perform its programmatic function?
You mentioned a plan. Have you been presented a plan?
I have not.
If I wanted to know the plan, would it be judicious to ask you or Mr. Musk, if I assume that one of you has knowledge of the plan, which of you would be better to answer the question about the plan?
Well, HUD's in the best position to answer what's in its plan, and it's my understanding that the plan has not been finalized in many respects yet.
But if I wanted to know the plan that Mr. Musk has, that you have not been given, would it be better to ask you or Mr. Musk?
I wouldn't be able to speak to the plan, so I believe Mr. Musk.
And if I want to know about the cuts that he has in mind, would it be better to have you tell me or Mr. Musk?
I think the same answer applies, sir.
I think you're right, sir. And I ask the question because it's my belief that Mr. Musk should be here to talk about the cuts. There's more involved in this than technology. We're talking about laying people off in significant numbers. And I don't think you're in a position to tell us what Mr. Musk plans to do with reference to these layoffs. I contend that he should come before this committee. There has been some indication that you should be here or some person in your position should be here on an annual basis. Well, if Mr. Musk is a temporary employee, he's only going to be on the job about 130 days max, and then maybe he'll be reinstated at a later time. But it would seem to me that that temporary employee who has this awesome amount of authority, he ought to come and sit in that seat and explain what he plans to do to the lives of these people. I don't ask you to answer anything in response to that or make any comment. I'm just concerned about the way we're doing business. I am. I'm concerned about how we are literally abdicating our responsibility. I'm concerned about the country. We should know that a democracy, a republic, if you will, but a democracy, this is a methodology by which you can get people in office. Democracy is not inexpugnable. It's not Invictus. A democracy is a work in progress. And every time we allow a chipping away, we are diminishing some aspect of our democracy. The democratic way to deal with this would be to have Mr. Musk come before the committee. He knows the answers. And I yield back, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Flood, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on Housing and Insurance, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Inspector General Begg, as the chairman of the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee, I have significant interest in the operations of HUD and their efficiency. We need to ensure that HUD has strong processes in place to track funds once they're dispersed and prevent waste, fraud, and abuse, and I appreciate your work in outlining some of the key challenges with the agency. I'd like to focus on one program you mentioned as needing greater oversight. That's the CDBG Disaster Relief Program. Given the prevalence of several large weather events and increased congressional conversation on DR funding, additional financial support, can you speak to the oversight challenges that persist at the block grant and sub-grantee level for DR recipients?
Thank you for the question. As you mentioned, disasters are occurring more frequently, and they will continue to occur more frequently. This program has grown exponentially in recent years, and the HUD systems and processes in place were not designed to oversee the DR program in the same way that it was designed to see the regular CDBG entitlement program. The department's done many things to try and make up for that gap. The universal notice that they published helped streamline the processes, and HUD's done everything within their control that they can to try to tighten up the timeliness in which funding flows out. But the system limitations and the lack of a regulatory statutory framework for the program still create a lot of risks in terms of what data is available to know whether it's working, and how can we be sure that the streamlining is going to be in place when it can change over time if it's simply a HUD notice.
So is HUD, in your opinion, do they have like a robust fraud, waste, abuse management effort to make sure those things aren't happening? Is there a system in place to ensure these dollars aren't being wasted?
In the disaster recovery program, we think they have room to improve. The Community Planning and Development Program Office does have a fraud risk specialist. They have expressed interest in working with us more on fraud risk, but they still have not assessed their particular fraud risks in that program and then come up with corrective actions to mitigate those and required grantees to do the same. So taking those first steps are really key in our opinion.
So in your prior testimony, you highlighted an instance where the Puerto Rico Department of Housing did not implement sufficient fraud risk management processes on $20 billion of HUD funding they received for disaster recovery and mitigation. It's remarkable to me that $20 billion could be awarded if the grantee doesn't have basic processes in place around managing fraud risks. I think you've answered this question, but is there a need for uniform processes around fraud risk management? And more importantly, would congressional authorization of the CDBG DR program be helpful in potentially establishing some uniform requirements for dealing with fraud?
I think the answer to both is yes. Permanent authorization is not necessarily a silver bullet to all the challenges in the program, but it would help in going a long way to standardize and reduce the variance in programs, which it does, in fact, contribute to the fraud risk.
Have you ever put together kind of some guidelines or ideas about what that authorization should look like from the DR perspective?
We've worked with various members over the years to provide technical assistance. We'd be happy to work with your office in doing that.
I would encourage you to reach out to Mr. Bliemptis in my office because this is something I want to focus on, and I think the ranking member also knows it's an issue. Moving to the Home Investment Partnership Program, the ranking member, Mr. Cleaver, and I are working on reauthorizing that. Have you in your work seen any challenges unique to oversight of the home program that you'd like to highlight?
Many of the challenges that we've seen with respect to home are kind of common grants management challenges, data limitations, they're more kind of standard that we see across CPD programs. What I can say is we know that the home program is incredibly important to the stakeholders, and the flexibilities it provides in creating solutions is very valuable.
Thank you very much for your testimony and for your work on behalf of the American people. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Seeing that we're ready to adjourn, I'd like to thank our our only witness, for your testimony today. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions for the witnesses to the chair. The questions will be forwarded to the witness for their response, and I ask our witnesses to please respond no later than May 13th, 2025. I will add, this committee recognizes the Secretary of HUD, Mr. Scott Turner, as the HUD authority. This hearing is adjourned.